Red wine exploded across my white Armani gown as my sister's wineglass tipped with calculated precision. 200 cameras turned toward us. My mother's voice rang out across the Metropolitan Foundation gala. Still the same worthless embarrassment. A high school dropout doesn't belong here. My father nodded. His face twisted with disgust. We should have known she'd try to worm her way back into society. They thought they were humiliating me in front of New York's elite. They thought I was still that broken 17-year-old girl they'd robbed and abandoned. What they didn't know was that in 60 seconds, the foundation director would announce me as tonight's $5 million donor. What they didn't know was that the man holding my hand, Julian Vance, was the billionaire who'd funded my company. What they didn't know was that I'd just become the CEO they'd read about in Forbes, the one who'd built a $3 billion empire from nothing. And what they really didn't know was that I had evidence of every crime they'd committed against me, and I was about to destroy them in front of everyone who mattered. The scared girl was dead. The woman they created was merciless. Before we go any further, if you're enjoying this story of standing up to toxic family dynamics and reclaiming your power, please hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment below telling me about a time you had to set boundaries with someone who didn't respect you. Your support means everything, and I read every single comment. Now, let me take you back to where this all began, because you need to understand exactly what they did to me before you can appreciate how satisfying their downfall truly was. 12 years ago, I was 17 years old and stupid enough to believe that family meant something. I sat in my father's mahogany-paneled study, the leather chair too big for my teenage frame. While my parents and sister stared at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. My grandmother, the only person in the Sterling family who had ever shown me genuine love, had died 3 months earlier. The grief was still raw, an open wound that throbbed with every breath. She'd been my sanctuary in a house that had always felt cold despite its 8,000 square feet and temperature-controlled climate. My mother, Victoria Sterling, sat perched on the edge of my father's desk, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the wood. She'd always been beautiful in that ice sculpture kind of way. All sharp angles and calculated expressions. My father Richard stood by the window, his surgeon's hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the manicured gardens rather than at me. And Serafina, my younger sister by 3 years, lounged in the chair across from me, filing her nails with an expression of bored superiority that I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "Vivian," my mother began, her voice dripping with that particular tone of condescension she reserved just for me. "We need to discuss your grandmother's trust fund." My heart jumped. Grandmother had mentioned a trust fund before, something she'd set up to make sure I could go to college, could build a future. In a family where my father was a renowned cardiac surgeon and my mother came from old money, I'd always been the odd one out. I struggled with dyslexia that no one bothered to get properly diagnosed. I preferred coding on my laptop to the country club socials they dragged me to. I asked too many questions and never quite fit into the cookie-cutter mold of what a Sterling daughter should be. "There was a trust fund," my father said, finally turning to look at me. "Your grandmother set aside $150,000 for your education." $150,000. It felt like an impossible amount of money. It meant college. It meant freedom. It meant I could finally escape this house where I'd always felt like a stranger. "However," he continued, and I felt my stomach drop at that single word. "Due to some unfortunate circumstances and poor market performance, the trust fund has been completely depleted." I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "What do you mean depleted? Grandmother only died 3 months ago." My mother sighed, that long-suffering sound she made whenever I dared to question anything. "The markets have been volatile. Vivian, you wouldn't understand these things. The point is, there's nothing left." I looked at Serafina, who was smiling at her newly filed nails, and something cold slithered down my spine. She was wearing a new dress. A Valentino. I'd seen her squealing over in Vogue just last week. Price tag, $8,000. Her wrist sparkled with a diamond tennis bracelet I'd never seen before. "But I don't understand," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I wanted. "Grandmother made me promise I'd go to college. She said the trust fund would make sure I could." My father's expression hardened. "Your grandmother had many ideas that weren't grounded in financial reality. Perhaps if you'd applied yourself more in school instead of wasting time on those computers, you'd have earned enough scholarships to not need the money. The words stung because they were designed to. I'd struggled in traditional school, my dyslexia making reading a nightmare that teachers dismissed as laziness. But I'd found my escape in coding, in the logical beauty of programming languages that made sense in a way English never had. My mother stood, smoothing down her Chanel suit. The fact is, Vivian, at 17 you're nearly an adult. It's time you learned that life doesn't hand you things on a silver platter. Your grandmother spoiled you with unrealistic expectations. I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand to see the account statements. I wanted to scream that this wasn't fair. But I'd learned long ago that arguing with Victoria and Richard Sterling was like trying to hold water in your hands. They would simply slip through any logic you presented and reform their position as if you'd never spoken at all. There's one more thing, my mother said, pulling a document from my father's desk drawer. We need you to sign this. It's simply a formality, acknowledging that you've been informed about the trust fund situation. She slid the papers across the desk to me. I should have read them. God, I should have read every single word on those pages. But I was 17 and heartbroken and overwhelmed. And when you've been conditioned your whole life to just comply, to not make waves, to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention your family throws your way, you do stupid things. I signed where she pointed, my signature a messy scrawl through tears. I was trying to hold back. Serafina laughed. A sound like breaking glass. Don't cry. Big sister. Maybe if you get a job at McDonald's, you can save up for community college. My mother didn't reprimand her. She never did. Instead, she collected the signed documents and tucked them away with a satisfied smile. That night, I lay in my bed in the room that had never quite felt like mine and tried to figure out what I was going to do. College had been my escape plan. Without it, I was trapped in this house with people who looked at me like I was something they'd accidentally tracked in on their shoes. The next few months were a masterclass in emotional manipulation disguised as family dynamics. My parents made it clear that if I wanted to stay under their roof, I needed to contribute. I got a job at a local coffee shop, working 40 hours a week while trying to finish high school. Every penny I earned went into a jar I hid in my closet. My pathetic attempt at saving for a future that felt impossibly far away. Meanwhile, Serafina was preparing for her debutante ball, a $25,000 extravaganza that my mother planned with the intensity of a military campaign. I came home from my shift one evening, my feet aching and smelling like stale coffee, to find my mother and sister in the living room, surrounded by fabric swatches and catering menus. Vivian, my mother said without looking up, you'll need to help serve at Serafina's ball. We're short on staff. Not invited as a guest. Not celebrated as the older sister. No, I was to be the help. I have my shift at the coffee shop that night. I said quietly, then you'll need to get it covered. My mother replied, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Family comes first. Vivian. Or have you forgotten that? Family comes first. The irony of that statement would become crystal clear soon enough. The night of Serafina's debutante ball, I stood in a corner of the ballroom at the Westchester Country Club, watching my sister float across the dance floor in a $12,000 Oscar de la Renta gown. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, and she was surrounded by admirers and well-wishers. I was wearing my coffee shop uniform under a borrowed catering vest, passing champagne to people who looked through me like I was invisible. My grandmother would have hated this. She would have pulled me onto that dance floor herself. I would have told everyone that both her granddaughters were equally worthy of celebration. But she was gone. And without her, I was nothing but a ghost in my own family's story. That night, as I cleaned up after the party, I found a receipt that had fallen from my mother's purse. It was from the dress shop, dated 3 months ago, right after my grandmother's death. $12,000 for Serafina's gown, $8,000 for the Valentino, another $15,000 for jewelry. I did the math in my head, my heart pounding. The timing was too perfect. The trust fund depleted right when Serafina needed money for her debutante season. But I was 17 and alone, and who was going to believe me over my family? I tucked the receipt back where I'd found it and tried to convince myself I was imagining things. I graduated high school 2 months later. My parents didn't come to the ceremony. They were at some medical conference in Bermuda. Serafina was at her boyfriend's beach house. I walked across that stage to an empty section of bleachers and felt something inside me crystallize into a hard, cold certainty. I was on my own. The day after graduation, I came home to find my belongings in boxes in the driveway. My mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You're 18 now, Vivian. It's time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. We've been more than generous letting you stay here through graduation." I stared at the boxes containing my entire life and felt nothing. No shock. No hurt. No surprise. Just a bone-deep exhaustion and a strange sense of relief. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, more out of curiosity than actual hope for an answer. "That's for you to figure out," my father said, appearing behind my mother. "You're an adult now. Adults don't rely on their parents to solve their problems." I loaded my boxes into my beat-up Honda Civic, the car I'd bought with my own money from the coffee shop, and drove away from that 8,000-square-foot prison without looking back. I slept in my car for 3 days before I found a room to rent in a house with 5 other people, all of us barely scraping by. I kept working at the coffee shop, picking up every shift I could. And at night, in that tiny room that smelled like mildew and old carpet, I taught myself advanced programming. The computer lab at the public library became my second home. I devoured every free online course I could find. MIT, Open Courseware, Stanford's free classes, every YouTube tutorial on machine learning and artificial intelligence. I had no degree, no credentials, no connections, but I had time, determination, and a rage that burned cold and steady in my chest. I wasn't going to just survive. I was going to become everything. They said I couldn't be. 6 months after they kicked me out, I was working 3 jobs and coding every spare minute. I'd created a prototype algorithm for analyzing financial data patterns using artificial intelligence. It was rough, unpolished, but the underlying concept was sound. I knew it could work. I just needed someone to see the potential. I spent weeks crafting a pitch deck, teaching myself business terminology, practicing my presentation in the bathroom mirror of that shared house until my roommates probably thought I was losing my mind. I targeted 20 venture capital firms in New York City. 19 rejected me without even looking at my proposal. Too young, no credentials, no track record. The 20th was Vance Capital, run by Julian Vance, a man known for being ruthless in business but having an eye for disruptive technology. I showed up at his office without an appointment, wearing my one professional outfit from Goodwill. My laptop clutched like a lifeline. His assistant tried to turn me away, but I'd learned something valuable from my toxic family. Sometimes you have to be shameless to survive. "I'll sit here until he sees me," I said calmly, settling into the waiting room chair. "I'll be here when he comes in tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, because what I have is going to change the financial industry, and if he doesn't see it, one of his competitors will." The assistant looked at me like I was insane. Maybe I was, but I'd already lost everything. What was a little more humiliation? Surprisingly, Julian came out of his office 20 minutes later. He was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with sharp dark eyes that missed nothing. "You're the girl who's been harassing my assistant," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm the woman who's about to make you a billionaire," I replied, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Interest, maybe, or amusement at my audacity. "You have 5 minutes," he said, holding open his office door. I made it count. I showed him my algorithm, walked him through the potential applications, demonstrated how it could predict market patterns with unprecedented accuracy. I didn't mention that I was living in a room with 5 strangers and had eaten ramen for dinner every night for the past month. I just showed him the work. When I finished, Julian leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "How old are you?" he asked. 19, I said, not bothering to lie. "And you built this yourself, no degree, no formal training?" I met his eyes. I had motivation. He laughed at that, a genuine sound that transformed his serious face. "I can see that. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you $5 million, office space, and 6 months. You're going to build me a company around this algorithm. If it works, we split the equity, 60-40. with you as the majority holder. If it fails, you owe me nothing, but I own the code. I nearly fell out of my chair. $5 million. 6 months ago, I'd been desperately trying to save up enough for community college, and now a venture capitalist was offering me $5 million. Why, I asked? Because I'd learned to question good fortune. Why me? You don't know anything about me. Julian's expression turned serious. I know you showed up here with nothing but an idea and the guts to demand. I listen. I know you built something remarkable with no resources and no support. And I know that kind of drive either burns out fast or builds empires. I'm betting on the empire. That meeting changed everything. I threw myself into building quantum dynamics with a focus that bordered on obsessive. Julian wasn't a silent investor. He mentored me, taught me the business side of tech, introduced me to people who mattered. But he also let me lead. Let me make decisions. Let me fail and learn and grow. The first year was brutal. We nearly ran out of money twice. I worked 100-hour weeks, sleeping in the office more often than not, but the algorithm worked. By year 2, we had our first major client, a hedge fund, that saw their returns increase by 37%. By year 3, we were the talk of Wall Street. By year 5, quantum dynamics was valued at over $1 billion. And I was being called the youngest female tech CEO in the financial sector. And through it all, I didn't contact my family once. I didn't send updates or seek their approval or try to prove anything to them. They'd thrown me away like garbage. And I simply returned the favor by erasing them from my existence. Julian and I grew closer through those intense years of building the company. What started as a professional relationship deepened into friendship. Then something more. He saw me at my worst. During the panic attacks, when imposter syndrome hit hard, during the sleepless nights when I was convinced everything would fall apart. And he stayed. Not because he pitied me or because he had a savior complex, but because he genuinely believed in me. When he proposed on the anniversary of our first meeting, I said yes without hesitation. 7 years after my family threw me out. I'd built a life they couldn't have imagined in their wildest dreams. I lived in a penthouse in Manhattan. I wore designer clothes without checking price tags. I had a company worth billions and a man who loved me for exactly who I was. And I'd done it all without them. But healing isn't linear. And success doesn't erase trauma. There were still nights when I'd wake up in a cold sweat. Back in that moment when I saw my boxes in the driveway. There were still times when I doubted myself. When that voice in my head sounded suspiciously like my mother telling me I wasn't good enough. Julian suggested therapy. And I resisted at first. Sterling women didn't do therapy. We didn't acknowledge weakness or imperfection. But I wasn't a sterling anymore. Not really. So I went. Dr. Chen helped me understand that what my family did wasn't just neglect or favoritism. It was financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and systematic conditioning designed to keep me small and grateful for scraps. She helped me see that I didn't have to forgive them to move forward. That anger could be a tool for change, rather than a poison I had to swallow. I was in one of those therapy sessions when Julian texted me that we'd been invited to the Metropolitan Foundation Gala, one of the most prestigious charity events in New York. They want to honor you as one of their major donors. Dr. Chen read from my phone screen when I showed her. How do you feel about that? I felt powerful. For the first time since I'd left that house. I felt like I had the upper hand. Because I knew without a doubt that my family would be there. My father still traveled in those circles. Still traded on his reputation as a surgeon. And they had no idea who I'd become. I feel like it's time, I said slowly. Time to show them exactly who they threw away. Doctor. Chen gave me one of her careful looks. What's your goal here? Vivian revenge closure recognition. I thought about it for a long moment. Proof. I finally said. Proof that they were wrong about me. Proof that I didn't need them. Proof that I'm not that scared 17-year-old girl anymore. She nodded. Just remember. Their reaction isn't actually about you. It's about them facing the consequences of their choices. Don't give them the power to make you feel small again. The night of the gala, I chose my outfit with military precision. A white Armani gown that cost more than my first car. Cartier diamonds at my throat and wrists. Louboutins on my feet. Julian wore a custom Tom Ford tux. And we looked like we'd stepped off the cover of Forbes. Because we had, actually, 3 months earlier. The Metropolitan Foundation Gala was everything you'd expect from New York's elite, trying to feel good about themselves. Crystal chandeliers. String quartet. Champagne flowing like water. And enough wealth in that ballroom to solve world hunger 3 times over. I saw them before they saw me. My mother looked older. More brittle somehow. Her smile tight as she worked the room. My father had gray at his temples now. But that same rigid posture that screamed superiority, and Serafina, my baby sister, glittered like a Christmas ornament on the arm of a man I recognized from the society pages. Alexander Thorne, one of the city's most prominent lawyers. She'd done well for herself, I thought with detached amusement, right up until she looked up and saw me. I watched the recognition flicker across her face, followed immediately by confusion, and then something that might have been fear. She whispered something to Alexander, who followed her gaze. My mother turned next, her champagne glass pausing halfway to her lips. And then my father, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and settling on cold anger. "Julian," I murmured, squeezing his hand. "Show time." We walked toward them with the confidence of people who owned the room, because in many ways, we did. Julian had donated $2 million to the foundation that year. I donated 5. Serafina recovered first, her face arranging itself into a parody of sisterly affection. "Vivian," she exclaimed, loud enough to draw attention. "Is that really you, my goodness? I barely recognized you." She air-kissed near my cheeks, and I caught the scent of her perfume. Chanel no. Woo. Same as always. "Of course you barely recognized me," I said sweetly. "The last time you saw me, I was loading my belongings into my car after being kicked out. I didn't have quite as many diamonds then." Alexander Thorne's eyes sharpened at that comment, but Serafina laughed it off. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. You know, Mom and Dad just thought it was time for you to be independent. My mother moved in then, her expression carefully neutral. Vivian, how unexpected to see you here. Are you working the event?" The casual cruelty of the question, the assumption that I could only be here as staff, made Julian's hand tighten on mine. "Actually," I said, matching her bright tone, "I'm one of the honored donors. But it's sweet that you still think of me as the girl pouring coffee." My father finally spoke, his voice cutting. "What exactly are you doing here? Vivian, this isn't the place for whatever game you're playing." Game. As if my success was something I'd manufactured to annoy them. "I'm not playing anything, Father," I replied calmly. "I'm simply existing in the world you said I'd never belong in." That's when Serafina made her move. I saw it coming in slow motion, that little stumble, her wineglass tilting at just the right angle. Red wine splashed across my white gown in a crimson stain that spread like blood. The crowd gasped. Serafina covered her mouth in exaggerated horror. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry. These heels are so high. I just lost my balance." The old me would have apologized. Would have made it easier for her. I would have cleaned up the mess and slunk away in embarrassment. But that girl was dead and buried, and the woman standing in her place had learned to fight. "It's fine," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. "Accidents happen. Though I have to say, Serafina, your aim seems to have improved since we were children. You always were quite deliberate about where things landed." My mother's face flushed. "How dare you imply that Serafina did that on purpose? You always were prone to dramatics." "Vivian, some things never change." Julian produced a silk handkerchief, dabbing at the wine stain with careful precision. The gesture was protective, intimate, and unmistakably that of a partner. My father noticed. "And who exactly are you?" he demanded of Julian. "I'm Julian Vance." Julian replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Vivian's fiancé. We've been together for 6 years." Serafina's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Vance, as in Vance Capital." She turned to me with venom in her eyes. "So you found yourself a sugar daddy? How very pragmatic of you." That's when the facade cracked. Not on my face, but on Alexander Thorne's. He was looking at Julian with recognition. And something else. Respect. Maybe. Or calculation. You're Julian Vance, he said slowly. You funded quantum dynamics. Julian inclined his head. One of my better investments. Alexander's eyes swung to me, and I watched comprehension dawn. You're Vivian Holloway. The Vivian Holloway. You're the CEO of Quantum Dynamics. The silence that followed was delicious. My mother's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. My father went pale. And Serafina? Poor Serafina. Looked like she'd been slapped. That's impossible, my mother whispered. You're just a high school dropout. You're nobody. I smiled. And it wasn't a kind expression. I am Vivian Holloway, founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics, currently valued at $3.2 billion. I created the AI algorithm that's used by every major hedge fund on Wall Street, and I did it all without a single penny from the Sterling Family Trust Fund. You know, the one you stole from me. My father's face turned purple. We did no such thing. That trust fund was lost to market forces. I pulled out my phone, opening an email I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Is that why I have bank statements showing $150,000 being transferred from the trust account to Serafina's personal account 3 days after grandmother's funeral? Or are we calling embezzlement a market force now? The crowd was riveted now. Phones out. Recording every second. This was going to be all over social media by morning. Victoria lunged forward, trying to grab my phone. You little bitch. You can't prove anything. Julian stepped between us, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. Mrs. Sterling, I strongly suggest you don't touch my fiancé. Assault charges tend to be messy. And we have about 200 witnesses here. Alexander Thorne had gone very still, his lawyer instincts clearly firing on all cylinders. He was looking at Serafina with new eyes. And I could see the questions forming. Is this true? He asked her quietly. Did you take money from a trust fund meant for your sister? Serafina's mask finally cracked. She didn't need it, she was just going to waste it on some stupid college degree she'd never finish. I needed it for my debut. For my season. I had opportunities. I laughed. A sound with no humor in it. You needed it for a dress. You stole my future. My grandmother's final gift to me. So you could play princess for a night. My mother tried to regain control. This is a private family matter. And you're making a scene. But Richard, the Foundation's chief development officer, had materialized at my elbow. His expression concerned but curious. Miss Holloway, is there a problem here? We're about to begin the ceremony. I turned to him with a brilliant smile, letting my family stew behind me. No problem at all. Richard, though I do think there might have been a little wine incident, my sister has always been a bit clumsy. We moved away, leaving my family in a tight, shocked cluster. I could feel their eyes boring into my back as we crossed the ballroom. Julian leaned down to whisper in my ear. Are you okay? I thought about it, taking inventory of my feelings, and I realized I felt lighter than I had in years. I'm perfect, I said. Let them choke on it. The ceremony was everything I'd imagined and more. The Foundation's president gave a speech about the importance of education and opportunity, about donors who understood what it meant to give back. And then he called my name. Our largest donor this year, contributing $5 million to our scholarship fund, is Ms. Vivian Holloway of Quantum Dynamics. Ms. Holloway's story is one of perseverance and self-determination. Despite facing significant obstacles, she educated herself, built one of the most successful tech companies in the financial sector, and now dedicates herself to ensuring other young people have the educational opportunities she had to fight for. I walked onto that stage to thunderous applause, very aware of my family's position in the ballroom. They were trapped, unable to leave without drawing more attention. I forced to watch, as I accepted an award for doing exactly what they'd said I could never do. Thank you, I said into the microphone, my voice steady and clear. This honor means more to me than you can imagine. I come from a family that didn't value education, that saw it as a waste of resources better spent elsewhere. I was told I was too stupid, too difficult, too unworthy of investment. And for a long time, I believed them. I paused, letting my words sink in, but I learned something crucial. Your worth isn't determined by the people who are supposed to love you. It's determined by what you do when those people fail you. I built quantum dynamics from nothing, working 3 jobs, sleeping in my car, teaching myself everything I needed to know from library computers and sheer determination. And now I get to help other kids who feel worthless, who've been told they're not worth investing in. Show them that they are capable of extraordinary things. The applause was deafening. As I left the stage, I made eye contact with my mother. She looked like she'd been carved from stone. Serafina was crying, mascara running down her face, and my father just looked old. The rest of the evening was a blur of congratulations and networking. Every major player in New York society wanted to talk to me, to be associated with the girl who'd built an empire from nothing. My family tried to leave early, but they were intercepted by several people who'd heard whispers of the drama and wanted the gossip firsthand. Julian and I finally escaped to our car around midnight, his driver navigating the Manhattan streets while we sat in the back, the partition giving us privacy. I started shaking then, adrenaline crash hitting hard. Julian pulled me against him, his arms solid and reassuring. "You were magnificent," he murmured into my hair. "Absolutely magnificent." I thought I'd feel triumphant. I thought revenge would taste sweet. But instead I just felt tired. "They looked so small," I said quietly. "All those years. They seemed so powerful, so untouchable. But tonight they just looked small and mean and pathetic." Julian tilted me chin up, his dark eyes serious. "That's because you've grown, Vivian. You're not looking up at them anymore. You're looking down from a height they'll never reach." Back at the penthouse, I stood on the balcony looking out at the city lights, still wearing my wine-stained gown. Julian came out with 2 glasses of whiskey, handing me one. "What are you thinking?" he asked. I took a sip, letting the burn ground me. "I'm thinking about what comes next, because you know they're not going to let this go." I was right. The next morning, my lawyer called before I'd even finished my coffee. "Vivian, we have a situation. Your father and mother have filed a lawsuit. They're claiming you owe them $5 million in parental support, cheating elder care laws." I nearly dropped my phone. "They're suing me for $5 million. Are you kidding?" My lawyer, Margaret Chen, had been with me since the early days of quantum dynamics. She sighed. "They're arguing that as their daughter, you're legally obligated to support them in their later years, especially given your means. It's a stretch, but in New York, elder care laws do exist." Julian had been listening on speaker. "Can they actually win this?" Margaret hesitated. "It depends on the judge and how the Sterling family frames the case. If they can prove genuine need and that you've refused to help despite being able to, they might have a shot. But Vivian, there's more. They're also making public statements, calling you an ungrateful daughter, claiming you've fabricated stories about family abuse to justify abandoning them." I felt that old familiar rage building, but this time it was cold and focused. How dare they? After everything they did to me, after stealing my trust fund, after throwing me out, they dare to play the victim. Julian's jaw was tight. "We're not letting them get away with this." "Margaret, what are our options?" Margaret's voice turned sharp, the tone she used when preparing for battle. "We countersue. We have evidence of the trust fund theft. We have witnesses to the emotional abuse. And we can prove they voluntarily severed ties with Vivian when she was barely an adult. We go for the throat." That's exactly what we did. Over the next 3 months, while my family's lawsuit crawled through the courts, we built our case. And I discovered something interesting. My grandmother's best friend, Evelyn Reed, had been the trustee on that fund, and she had records. Complete, detailed records of every transaction. Mrs. Reed was in her 70s now, living in a retirement community in Connecticut. When I called her voice went soft with emotion. "Vivian, dear, I've been waiting for you to reach out. I have something for you." We drove up to see her the next week. She lived in a comfortable apartment filled with books and photos, including several of my grandmother that made my heart ache. Mrs. Reed sat us down and pulled out a file box. "Your grandmother knew," she said without preamble. "She knew how your parents treated you, how they favored Serafina. That's why she set up the trust with such specific language. It was to be used only for your education, not transferable. not accessible to your parents. She pulled out document after document. Bank statements showing the transfer of $150,000 from the trust to Serafina's account. Forged signatures on authorization forms. My mother's handwriting on deposit slips. A paper trail so clear. It was basically a confession. "Why didn't you say something?" I asked. My voice thick with emotion. "When they took the money, why didn't you stop them, Mrs.?" Reed's eyes filled with tears. "I did try. Sweetheart. I reported it to the bank. To the trust administrator. But your father had connections. And I was just an old family friend. They buried it. Called it a misunderstanding. I've been keeping these records safe, hoping you'd someday be in a position to fight back. And here you are. With Mrs. Reed's evidence, our legal position went from strong to unassailable. Margaret filed our countersuit for trust fund embezzlement, fraud, and emotional damages. She also included a detailed accounting of every way my parents had failed in their duty of care. From refusing to get my dyslexia properly diagnosed to kicking me out at 18 with nowhere to go, the media had a field day. The Sterling family drama became tabloid fodder. Prominent surgeon and his socialite wife accused of stealing from their own daughter's inheritance. The contrast between their public personas and their private cruelty was too delicious for the press to resist. My company's board was concerned about the publicity affecting our business. I called an emergency meeting, standing before them in my office with the Manhattan skyline behind me. "I understand your concerns," I told them, "but I will not back down from this fight. What my family did to me, they do to countless young people every day. Financial abuse, emotional manipulation, using power and position to crush anyone who doesn't fit their mold. If we settle quietly, if we make this go away with money, we send the message that people with power can do whatever they want. I won't do that." Our CFO, a woman named Patricia, who'd been with us from year 2, spoke up. "The press is painting you as vindictive. Vivian. They're saying this is a petty family squabble." I smiled grimly. "Then we change the narrative. We show them exactly what petty looks like." The next day, I gave an interview to the New York Times. I laid out everything, not as a revenge story, but as a conversation about financial abuse in families, about how wealth and power can be used to control and diminish. I talked about my dyslexia, about the trust fund theft, about being made to work as staff at my own sister's debutante ball, about boxes in the driveway on my 18th birthday. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people came forward with their own stories of family financial abuse, of being told they weren't worth investing in, of having inheritances stolen or education funds raided. I'd touched a nerve I didn't know existed. Support flooded in from unexpected places, other tech CEOs, women who'd fought their own battles, educators, therapists, advocates for young people aging out of toxic family situations. My story became bigger than just me versus my parents. It became a movement. Meanwhile, my family was falling apart. Richard lost privileges at his hospital after an investigation revealed he'd been covering up medical errors using his connections. Several former patients came forward with malpractice claims once the protective shell of his reputation cracked. Victoria was quietly dropped from several charity boards, her social standing crumbling as the truth about her character spread through her circles. And Serafina, poor Serafina, found herself suddenly single when Alexander Thorne very publicly ended their engagement. He released a statement that was polite but damning. "After learning information about my former fiancé's character and behavior that is inconsistent with my values, I have chosen to end our relationship." Rumors swirled that he'd been sickened by the trust fund theft, that he couldn't marry someone who'd stolen from their own sister. Serafina tried calling me, leaving tearful voicemails. "Please, Vivian, call off your lawyers. You're destroying our lives. I'm sorry about the money. Okay, I was young and stupid. But you've won now. You've proven your point. Can't we just move past this?" I listened to her messages with Julian beside me. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I thought about 17-year-old me, signing those papers without reading them, because I'd been conditioned to trust my family. I thought about sleeping in my car, about learning to code in the public library, about every person who'd told me I'd never amount to anything. "I want justice," I said finally. "Not revenge, but actual justice. I want them to face real consequences for what they did. And I want to make sure no one else's grandmother's legacy gets stolen like mine was. The case went to mediation 6 months after that disastrous gala. We all sat in a conference room, lawyers surrounding us like armor. My parents looked like they'd aged a decade. Richard's hands shook slightly as he clasped them on the table. Victoria's designer clothes hung a bit loose, as if stress had stolen her appetite. Serafina wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. The mediator started going through the evidence, and I watched my parents' lawyer visibly deflate as the extent of the documentation became clear. The trust fund theft was undeniable. The signatures were demonstrably forged. The timeline was damning. Mr. and Mrs. R. Peck Sterling, the mediator said heavily, I have to advise you that if this goes to trial, you're not just looking at a civil judgment. The prosecution could file criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. My mother made a small, wounded sound. My father's jaw worked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Their lawyer called for a recess. When they came back 20 minutes later, his expression told me everything I needed to know. My clients are prepared to settle, he said. They will withdraw their lawsuit against Miss Holloway and agree to a permanent restraining order prohibiting contact. Margaret leaned forward. And the matter of restitution, the lawyer looked at my parents, who both seemed to have shrunk in their chairs. They are prepared to pay damages in the amount of $10 million for emotional distress, theft of the trust fund, and punitive damages. $10 million. More than 60 times what they'd stolen from me. It should have felt like victory. Instead, I just felt hollow. I want something else. I heard myself say. Everyone looked at me. Julian's hand found mine under the table. Squeezing gently, I want a full, written confession of what you did. Every detail, signed and notarized. And I want that $10 million put into a charitable trust, not paid to me personally. The Holloway Legacy Fund, providing full-ride scholarships to students from abusive or neglectful family situations who are trying to educate themselves. 10 scholarships a year. Full tuition, room, board, and a living stipend. In perpetuity, my mother's face crumpled. The money was one thing. Money could be earned back, could be hidden, could be rationalized. But a confession, a permanent record of their guilt funding, a charity that would bear my name and help people like me, that was a different kind of loss. Vivian, my father said hoarsely. The first words he'd spoken directly to me in the mediation. Please, we're your parents. We made mistakes, but we're still your family. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but distant pity. You stopped being my family the day you threw my belongings in the driveway. You made your choice then. I'm making mine now. Those are my terms. Accept them, or we go to trial. And I promise you, the criminal charges will be the least of your worries. They accepted. The confession was drafted, signed, notarized, and filed with the court. $10 million was transferred into a trust account. The restraining order was issued. And just like that, after 12 years, the Sterling family was officially out of my life. The press loved the resolution. The narrative of the self-made billionaire forcing her abusers to fund scholarships for other abuse victims was too perfect. The first 10 Holloway Legacy scholarships were awarded 8 months later. I attended the ceremony, shaking hands with each recipient, looking into their eyes and seeing myself at 17. One girl, her name was Maria, pulled me aside afterward. Thank you, she said, crying. My parents kicked me out when I came out as gay. I've been sleeping on friends' couches, trying to work enough to save for college. This scholarship, it's not just money. It's proof that I matter, that someone believes in me. I hugged her tight, my own eyes wet. You matter, I told her fiercely. You always mattered. Never let anyone make you believe otherwise. That night, Julian and I stood on our balcony again, a bottle of champagne between us. The city glittered below. Millions of lights, representing millions of stories. Millions of struggles and triumphs. How do you feel? Julian asked. The question he'd been asking me throughout this entire process. I thought about it, really examined my emotions. I feel free, I said finally. For the first time since I was 17. I feel completely free. They can't hurt me anymore. They can't make me small. And every year, 10 more kids are going to get the chance I had to create. The opportunity my grandmother wanted me to have. Julian pulled me close, his chin resting on the top of my head. I'm proud of you. Not for the company, not for the money, but for this, for taking your pain and turning it into hope for others. 6 months later, Quantum Dynamics announced a merger that valued the company at $5 billion. I was 31 years old, one of the wealthiest self-made women in technology, and I'd done it all on my own terms. The award ceremony where I was honored for philanthropy and entrepreneurship was held at the same venue as that fateful gala. Full circle, I thought, as I stood on the stage, looking out at the crowd. But this time, there was no one in the audience who could make me feel small. This time, I was surrounded by people who believed in me, who'd built something meaningful alongside me. I gave my acceptance speech without notes. Speaking from the heart, they say success is the best revenge. But I've learned that's not quite true. Success is just success. It doesn't heal old wounds or undo past harm. What heals is choosing yourself, setting boundaries, refusing to accept mistreatment, even from people who are supposed to love you. What heals is building something meaningful, not to prove anyone wrong, but because you believe you deserve to exist fully in the world. I paused, looking around the room. To everyone out there who's been told they're not enough, who's been diminished or dismissed or discarded, I want you to know something. Your worth is not determined by the people who failed to see it. Your potential is not limited by those who refuse to nurture it. You are capable of extraordinary things, and you don't need anyone's permission to pursue them. The standing ovation went on for 3 minutes. As I left the stage, I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirror. The woman looking back at me was polished, confident, powerful. Nothing like that scared 17-year-old who'd signed away her future in her father's study. But she was still in there somewhere. That girl who'd refused to give up even when everyone said she should. She was the foundation everything else was built on. I touched the diamond necklace at my throat. A gift from Julian for our engagement. My grandmother would have loved this. I thought. She would have been so proud, as if summoning her with my thoughts. Mrs. Reed appeared at my elbow. Your grandmother is proud, she said softly, somehow knowing exactly what I was thinking. She knew you had this strength in you. That's why she fought so hard to give you that trust fund. Even though your parents argued against it, she saw who you could become. I squeezed her hand. This woman who'd kept faith with my grandmother's wishes, even when it would have been easier to let it go. Thank you for keeping those records, for believing that one day they'd matter. Mrs. Reed smiled. I knew they'd matter, because I knew you'd survive. Your grandmother told me once, Vivian has a fire in her that nothing can extinguish. They can try to smother it, but it'll just burn brighter. She was right. That night, back in our penthouse, I couldn't sleep. Julian was breathing softly beside me, but my mind was racing with memories. I got up and went to my office, pulling out the file I kept of everything from those days. The original trust fund documents, photos of my grandmother. Even that receipt I'd found the night of Serafina's debutante ball, the one that first made me suspect the truth. And tucked in the back, a letter I'd written to myself at 19. Right after Julian agreed to fund Quantum Dynamics. I'd been so full of hope and terror then, convinced I'd fail, convinced I'd prove everyone right about me being worthless. I opened it with shaking hands and read my own words from 12 years ago. Dear future me, if you're reading this, it means you didn't give up. It means you pushed through the fear and the doubt and the voices telling you that you'd never amount to anything. I don't know if you succeeded with this company. I don't know if Julian's $5 million bet paid off. But I know you tried. I know you didn't let them break you. And that has to count for something. Right, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget what it felt like to have nothing. To be nothing in everyone's eyes. Use it. Let it fuel you. Let it make you kind to people who are where we were. Let it make you fierce in protecting people who can't protect themselves. And if you ever doubt yourself, if you ever feel like maybe they were right about you, remember this. You built something from nothing. You refused to stay small. You survived. Love. 19-year-old you. I sat there crying, clutching that letter to my chest. That girl. That scared, determined, brilliant girl. She'd done it. She'd become everything she'd hoped and more. Julian found me there at dawn, still holding the letter. He didn't say anything. I just pulled me into his arms and held me while I cried years of held-back tears. For the girl I'd been. For the grandmother who'd believed in me. For every moment of struggle and triumph that had led me here. When I finally stopped crying, my face puffy and my nose running in a distinctly unglamorous way, Julian kissed my forehead. Better, he asked. I nodded, feeling wrung out, but clean somehow. I think I finally grieved it all. The family I should have had, the childhood I deserved, the easy path I never got to walk. I think I can finally let it go. Julian tilted my chin up, his dark eyes serious. You know what makes you extraordinary, Vivian? It's not the company or the money or any of the external success. It's that you took all that pain and poison, and you alchemized it into something golden. You turned trauma into triumph. Abusi into advocacy. That's true power. 3 years later, the Holloway Legacy Fund had awarded 30 full-ride scholarships. I knew every recipient by name, followed their progress, celebrated their victories. 2 had started their own companies. 1 was in medical school. Another was becoming a teacher specifically to work with kids from difficult family situations. They were taking their second chances and building something meaningful, just like I had. The Sterling family, meanwhile, had largely disappeared from public life. My father lost his medical license entirely after more malpractice cases came to light. My mother was living in a modest apartment in Queens, her old money largely depleted by legal fees and settlements, and Serafina, I heard through the social grapevine, was working as a real estate agent in New Jersey. Her dreams of marrying into wealth and power thoroughly destroyed. I didn't take pleasure in their downfall. Not really. It was more like watching strangers from a distance, people who'd once been central to my life but were now just shadows. Dr. Chen had been right. Their failure wasn't my victory. My victory was building a life I loved, surrounded by people who valued me, doing work that mattered. I thought about my parents sometimes, wondered if they ever regretted what they'd done, if they ever lay awake at night thinking about the daughter they'd thrown away, the granddaughter my grandmother had adored. But then I'd let those thoughts drift away like smoke, because they didn't matter anymore. I'd built my own legacy, and it had nothing to do with them. On the 10th anniversary of starting Quantum Dynamics, Julian and I hosted a party at our penthouse. The guest list read like a who's who of tech and finance. But what I was most proud of were the Holloway Legacy scholars who came. Young people whose lives had been transformed by a second chance, by someone believing in them when their own families didn't. At midnight, Julian pulled me onto our balcony. Away from the party noise, the city sparkled below us, and I could hear the faint sounds of laughter from inside. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a locket, antique and beautiful, with delicate engraving on the case. Open it, Julian urged. Inside were 2 photos. One was my grandmother, young and vibrant, her smile warm and genuine. The other was me at 19, taken that first day in Julian's office, looking terrified and determined in equal measure. I wanted you to have a reminder, Julian said softly, of where you came from, and the women who made you possible. Your grandmother gave you the dream. 19-year-old, you had the courage to chase it. And now, here you are, paying it forward. I clutched the locket, overwhelmed with emotion. I miss her. I admitted, even after all these years, I miss my grandmother so much. She was the only one who saw me. Julian wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin on my shoulder. She still sees you, love, and she's so proud. We stood there for a long time, watching the city lights, thinking about journeys and destinations and the long, winding road between trauma and healing. Behind us, the party continued. Young scholars laughing with tech moguls, friends and colleagues celebrating a decade of innovation, a community I'd built from nothing, from determination and pain and an unwillingness to accept the small life others had planned for me. This was my real revenge. I realized, not the money, Not the public shaming of my family. Not even the scholarships. Though those mattered deeply, my real revenge was living fully, loving openly, succeeding spectacularly, and refusing to let their poison corrupt me into becoming like them. I could have become bitter, cruel, dismissive of others. God knows I had reason enough. But instead, I'd chosen to be the person I needed when I was 17. The person who believed in potential, who invested in futures, who understood that worthiness wasn't earned but inherent, the person my grandmother had always known I could be. Julian, I said, turning in his arms to face him. Let's have a baby. His eyes widened in surprise. We'd talked about children abstractly. Someday, when things settled down. But I suddenly wanted it with a fierceness that surprised me. I want to raise a child who never doubts their worth. Who grows up knowing they're loved unconditionally. Who understands that family isn't about blood. It's about choosing each other every day. I want to build that family we both deserved. Julian's smile started slow, and then blazed across his face. Yes. Absolutely yes. When do we start? I laughed. The sound free and joyful. How about now? 2 years later, I stood in the nursery of our penthouse, holding my daughter Evelyn Rose, named for my grandmother and Julian's mother. She was 6 months old, with dark hair like her father and my grandmother's warm brown eyes. She didn't know it yet, but she was the heiress to a technology empire. More importantly, she was the heiress to a legacy of resilience, of refusing to accept mistreatment, of building something meaningful from nothing. Your great-grandmother would have loved you so much. I whispered to her. She fought to give me a future, and now I get to give you every opportunity, every advantage, every ounce of love and support I never had. You'll never doubt you're wanted. Baby girl. Never. Evelyn gurgled and grabbed my finger with her tiny fist, and I felt something settle deep in my chest. This was what healing looked like. Not forgetting the past, but building a future that honored the good parts and rejected the toxic ones. Not seeking revenge, but creating something so beautiful that the ugliness couldn't touch it. I thought about 17-year-old me, loading boxes into that Honda Civic, crying and scared, and certain her life was over. If I could go back and tell her anything, I'd tell her this: you're going to make it. More than make it. You're going to build an empire. You're going to find love. You're going to help hundreds of kids who are where you are now. And one day, you're going to hold your daughter in your arms and realize that every terrible thing you survived was preparing you for this moment. For building the family you deserved all along. The Sterling family never tried to contact me again. The restraining order held, and eventually, I think they understood that I was truly done with them. There was no reconciliation, no tearful reunion, no late realization that they'd been wrong. That was okay. I'd learned that closure doesn't have to come from the people who hurt you. Sometimes, closure is simply deciding they don't get to hurt you anymore. Sometimes, it's building a life so full and rich that their absence doesn't leave a hole. Sometimes, it's understanding that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's construction. Building something they said you couldn't build, becoming someone they said you couldn't become. Succeeding in ways they couldn't even imagine. On Evelyn's first birthday, I stood before the Holloway Legacy Scholars, giving my annual speech at the scholarship ceremony. I looked out at the 50 young faces, kids who'd survived abuse, neglect, homelessness, rejection, kids who'd been told they were worthless but refused to believe it. Your past does not define you, I told them, my daughter asleep in Julian's arms in the front row. Your family's mistakes do not define you. Their inability to love you properly does not define you. What defines you is what you do next. How you choose to move forward. Whether you let their poison corrupt you or use it as fertilizer to grow something beautiful. A girl in the third row was crying, and I saw myself in her face. It's going to be hard, I said, speaking directly to her and to every person in that room who knew what it meant to be thrown away. There will be days when you doubt yourself, when you hear their voices in your head telling you you're not enough. But here's the truth. They never wanted you to know you are enough. Exactly as you are. Right now, you are enough, and every day you choose to keep going. Every day you choose to build instead of destroy. Every day you choose to be better than the people who hurt you. You're winning. Not because you're beating them, but because you're freeing yourself. The ovation was thunderous. After the ceremony, that girl who'd been crying came up to me. "I'm Sophie," she said. "My parents kicked me out when I was 16 because I wanted to go to college instead of getting married. I've been on my own for 2 years. And sometimes I still hear my mom's voice saying, 'I'm selfish and ungrateful.'" I hugged her. "Sophie, you are neither selfish nor ungrateful. You're brave. You chose yourself when no one else would. That's not selfishness. That's survival. And now, with this scholarship, you get to thrive." She clutched me tighter. "Did it ever stop hurting? Did you ever stop wishing they'd come back and apologize?" I pulled back to look at her, seeing the raw hope and pain in her eyes. Honestly, sometimes I still wish my grandmother was here to see everything I've built. Sometimes I imagine what it would have been like to have parents who celebrated my success instead of resenting it. But I stopped waiting for their apology years ago, because their apology wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't give me back the years I lost, wouldn't erase the trauma. What changed everything was when I stopped needing their validation. When I realized I could validate myself. When I built a chosen family who loved me for exactly who I am. That's when I was finally free. Sophie nodded slowly, absorbing this. "Thank you. For this scholarship. For your story. For showing me it's possible." I smiled. "Go build something amazing. Sophie, not to prove anyone wrong, but because you deserve to live fully. And then, when you're ready, pay it forward. Help someone else who's where you are now." That's how we break the cycle. As I watched her walk away, shoulders a little straighter, I felt Julian's arm around my waist. "You're changing lives," he murmured, "one scholarship at a time." I leaned into him, watching Evelyn sleep peacefully against his shoulder. "We're changing lives. All of us together. That's what makes it matter." Now, as I finish telling you this story, I want you to understand something crucial. This isn't just about me versus my toxic family. This is about every person who's ever been told they're not enough, who's been used and discarded, who's been made to feel small by the very people who should have lifted them up. If you're in that place right now, if you're the person being diminished or manipulated or abused, I want you to know that it's not your fault. Their inability to love you properly says nothing about your worthiness and everything about their brokenness. You have the power to choose differently, to set boundaries, to walk away, to build a life that honors who you really are, instead of who they demanded you be. It won't be easy. There will be moments when you doubt yourself, when you're tempted to go back, when you wonder if you're being too harsh or too unforgiving. But remember, this protecting yourself is not cruel. Refusing to accept mistreatment is not selfish. Choosing your own well-being over someone else's comfort is not wrong. It's survival. It's self-love. It's the first step toward building the life you deserve. So here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever had to cut ties with someone toxic, even though everyone said you should forgive and forget? Have you ever chosen yourself when your family demanded you choose them? What did that look like for you? Drop your story in the comments below. Let's create a community of people who understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. And if you found this story meaningful, if it resonated with your own experiences or gave you hope for the future, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about resilience, revenge, and reclaiming your power, because your story matters too, and I want to hear it. Remember, you're not defined by what was done to you. You're defined by what you do next. Choose yourself, build your empire, and never, ever let anyone make you feel small again.